Welcome. My name is Brian, and obviously some of you who've looked in my channel, I usually talk about hospitality because that's most of my background, and I hope to do more videos on that. So for those who've subscribed, I really thank you for that. But this week, I'm not going to talk about that because something happened over the weekend that I cannot believe, and it's still festering with me, and that was about the college football playoffs here. I'm a Florida State grad. Of course, I'm very upset about it. And for those who are probably going to get in the comment sections, you're going to say, grow up. You guys didn't play enough people. You don't deserve to get in, blah, blah, blah. You're probably a Michigan or Alabama or Washington or a Texas fan. And, you know, let me tell you something. If that happened to your team, you would be doing the same thing that I'm doing. It's a disgusting thing that what the playoffs and the committee did. Let's look at this basically winning percentages. Florida State matches up with the winning percentages of everybody in the top 10. They're not horrible at this. So you can't sit there and judge that on the winning percentage. Then you sit there and you say, well, how about losses? No losses. There's only 3 teams that virtually got through was Michigan, Washington, and Florida State as far as no losses that were in competition here. And what does that mean? Well, when you are undefeated and you go and play even the simplest of teams, they're going to break out everything they can to take you down. So it is tougher to play in that situation. But Florida State didn't have any losses. When you say Florida State, did they do everything they could? They did. They won their games. Could you say the same about Alabama or Texas? No, they did not because they lost the game. So when you talk about that, it doesn't make any sense to me. Then you say to the committee, we want the 4 best teams. What does best mean? That's a very generic term. I mean, if I were to say and take it in retrospect to say, okay, what do you define as, successful in life? And almost everybody's going to tell me money. How much money I made is what defines my success. When in fact, I could probably, in my teachings, I could take you to someone that makes minimum wage, comes in every day and does the dishes. And yet they are the happiest people on the planet I've ever met because they go and hug their wife and kids and say, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon every time that they get that opportunity. So when I look at success, it's family. I don't look at the fact that it's money. So when I say that, I say now we go back to the best. Well, what do you mean by the best? Because if you're looking at the fact of what the rankings of the offense and the defense, do we do this off of an eye test? Because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a Buccaneers fan. What was your eye test? And all these ESPN commentators and everybody out there who was commentating, you all thought that the Buccaneers were just going to get slaughtered. Some of you had already said, well, congratulations, Kansas City. In 2020, you're going to go back-to-back Super Bowl champions. Good job. How'd that pan out for your eye test? Florida State Buccaneers not only won the game, but they shut the Kansas City Chiefs out to where they only scored 3 field goals. So you can't sit there and tell me that the eye test works. And for someone like Stephen A., who's out there sitting there saying, well, TCU screwed this up for you. Well, something he's not telling you is that TCU beat Michigan in the first playoff. And then they went to the final to play Georgia, and that's where they got beat. Let's go back to 2013 and 2014. In 2014, the Seminoles were invited to the first playoff ever. They played Oregon, and they got killed. Now, were you going to take your eye test and say, you know what, they shouldn't have been in that game? Really? Because they just won the entire championship the year before in 2013. But, they're not a strong team because the eye test says that they're not. It doesn't work. Then we get into the rankings. Florida State is sitting at number 14 before going into this game. Number 14 in defense going into this game. They played an opponent team in Louisville that has the 9th ranked offense. And they were able to virtually shut them out. So you can't sit there and say that they didn't play a tough team. That Louisville had an average of over 30 points per their opponents this season. So that's not it. Then we look at the Seminoles' our offensive line. We went against a number 29th ranked defense in Louisville with a 3rd-string quarterback. And we still put up more numbers because we put up 219 total yards to Michigan, who played Iowa, that was ranked 18, and they only put up 213 yards. A 3rd-string quarterback going out there and put up just as many yards, if not more, than Michigan, with a ranked 14th team in Louisville versus a ranked 18th team. So you can't sit there and tell me that that's the situation. Not to mention Florida State has tons of other experience that you can look at this. You have Benson. Benson has just under 1,000 yards in rushing this season. Toafili has just under 500. Huge differences within the running game here. It's not exactly a very weak team when it comes to the running game. Their defense is obviously in the top 4, I believe. Their offense needs to struggle. But what are we judging this on? If we were to sit there and we judge a third-string quarterback, that's not what the committee was supposed to be judging. It was judging what quarterback they believe is going to be in the playoffs. That's 3 weeks from now. Rodmaker is going to be able to get out of concussion protocol by that time. So we're not judging the third-string quarterback. If we're judging the rest of the teams, or the rest of the team in the offense and the running game and the defense, that's still there. So that's not a big difference. I look at this and say that it's not a fair situation for him. And I know that when you sit there and you listen to Stephen A., for instance, and he talks about TCU, we don't want to have this TCU moment where they go in and play Georgia and they get smoked. I have news for you, Stephen. TCU beat Michigan in the first playoff that year and then lost to Georgia. So basically you're telling me that neither Michigan shouldn't have been there just as much as TCU shouldn't have been there, because TCU beat Michigan. So they should have been able to defeat Michigan if they had played Georgia last year by a lot, according to your eye test. So that didn't work. I honestly, at the end of the day, the QBs, what the committee was looking at was they were judging a quarterback that's not going to be playing in the playoffs. Concussion protocol is only usually a week to 2 weeks. And we saw Rodmaker on the sideline. Not to mention, he's going to have 3 weeks of taking all the snaps and being able to get better with that team. And you're going to tell me that Florida State doesn't have the receivers? And Johnny Wilson, as well as Hill, as well as Coleman? You kidding me? These guys could go in the NFL tomorrow, and they would do well. So that's not the case. Ultimately, I find that what I see here is that you had nothing to hold them back on. And that you ended up giving two, not just one, two one-loss teams in the top 4 over Florida State and made them number 5. To be honest with you, I don't know why they made us number 5, because if the rate you were going, you should have put Georgia at 5 and we could have been at 6. Heck, as far as the committee is concerned, as bad as I guess you thought we were going to be in the playoffs, I'm surprised you kept us in the top 10 at all. Ultimately, this came down to a money situation. It is. It's all about the money in this. And you follow the money train here. Okay, Texas sits with 7.82 million viewers. Michigan sitting with 6.26 million viewers and fans. Alabama, the same thing, 5.34. Florida State actually has a better fan base than Alabama does. But think about that. Now you got 3 out of the 4 teams that are in the college playoffs right now that have an unbelievable amount of fan following. To be honest with you, Washington doesn't sit with many. I think the committee really didn't want Washington to win because Oregon has a bigger following than Washington. But for me, honestly, I hope that Washington wins this whole damn thing. Because if they did, that's not what the committee wants. That's not what the NCAA wants. They don't want a Washington to win the game. They want a Michigan. They want a Texas, because Texas is finally on the news again. And of course, Alabama. Oh, our precious Alabama, we can't leave them out. Because then you're sitting with Paul Feinbaum over here, who sits there and said Florida State, they shouldn't have been in it, and the committee got it right. I mean, this guy, Paul, has his head so far up the SEC's ass that if Nick Saban coughs, his glasses are coming out of his mouth. So I could tell you right now, this guy obviously has bias with Alabama. So I don't believe any word that he's saying within this. It's a money game at the end of the day. Which ones are going to give you the best viewership? We want to play with the best teams because we want to see a difference. Well, what happens if this is a blowout? What happens if we get in this and we see Texas get blown out or we see Alabama get blown out? I don't really care for Michigan, but I'd love if Michigan would have beat the hell out of Alabama. Just stop this. But at the end of the day, as I said, you follow the money in this. ESPN, of course, all people like Kurt Herbstreit, who I really liked, but man, I can't believe he got on this board of talking how the committee got it right. It is not fair to sit there and omit a team that honestly did everything in their power to be there. And by not putting them in there, not only do you hurt the rest of that team, but you hurt the program. You hurt even Jordan Travis. Now you got a quarterback that's possibly thinking, man, I really screwed up. Because I got injured, not only did I screw up for my team, but I screwed up for our conference. I screwed up for the entire organization of Florida State. I hope he doesn't feel that way, because he didn't. Injuries are part of the game. But because the fact that the committee values that, which makes no sense to me. If you value the fact of the quarterback not being in there, then why did you put us number 4 last week? You basically dangle bait in front of Florida State saying that if you win, you're in, but guess what? Oh, Alabama won. We can't have an SEC not into the Final Four. That can't happen. So we have to find some way to get them in. Texas, I don't understand why they're in. Texas played a higher ranked opponent for their championship game than we did, and yet somehow they get in. I look at from the fact of what this is going to cause, and I think this is why this one's going to remain in the news. If Alabama had been omitted or Texas had been omitted from the playoffs, I think we would have had a week long of people being upset, but that's it. That's not the case. You had Florida State, which did everything correct, and they were one of the best teams in there. And so now you not only have Governor DeSantis, you have Senator Scott, you're going to have a lot of people looking into this as wondering what's going on. And to me, honestly, I'd go after this committee. For anybody who can look it up, you can look up who each one of these committee members are and their businesses. Man, I would start boycotting these businesses. These people have absolutely ruined this profession. Why why now would you leave out a top 5 conference? Why now? It's basically a middle finger to the ACC. And here's the problem from the ACC that they look in this. Florida State is already looking to get out of the ACC. They've been looking at this for years. And at the end of the day, they can't get out because it's going to cost them about $120 million to leave that organization. Now, the ACC still has a great basketball. I mean, that's the dominating basketball conference. But in football, there's some struggles. You've got new schools trying to get in. But now they're going to have to look at this and say, wow, is Florida State the place to go? Because if I was a recruit and I'm out there and I'm saying, I'm going to sign with Florida State, now I can look at this and say, I don't know now. Because if Florida State does everything they can to get in, how do you know the committee's not going to let them in again? If this is what the outcome was. And if Florida State leaves the ACC, you know who's going to fall? Miami's going to fall. And the only thing that's going to be left in the ACC is Clemson. So is that what the committee wants? It's interesting is because the ACC and ESPN have these contracts. So I'm surprised that ESPN announcers are actually even making this thing saying Florida State's being a baby. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I still can't believe that this is what happened. And I hope that Florida State finds a way to either defeat Georgia in a way that impresses. They don't even have to defeat Georgia, to be honest with you. If they lose by a touchdown or less, they already won and defeated in their case in point. Because everybody said that they would just get slaughtered when they walked in. And that was the eye test, is they were going to get slaughtered. And it is any given Saturday. You never know. One team is going to have another team's number. Same as I said earlier in this that Auburn, who wasn't even ranked, almost won that game against Alabama except for a Hail Mary at the end. So we wouldn't even be having this discussion because that would be sitting at a 2-loss team. But we can't take the SEC out, and we can't take out precious Alabama out of this thing. That's what's really sad about this. And you've got an ACC program, you've got a Florida State thing that has to look at recruitment. Will these players want to come to a conference that doesn't get invited? That they're just not tough enough. And so they're going to look at a Big Ten or whatever. And I think that Florida State, that's who they're actually looking to go with, is a Big Ten conference. But ultimately, I think that the $120 million is going to be a far stretch for them to get to that point. Truthfully, what I would do if I were Florida State and Georgia is I would sit there and talk to each other and say, listen, coach to coach, let's just put our second stringers in there. Let's begin to look at what we're going to have on the field for next season and announce that. Make it to where it looks like an exhibition game and no one's going to want to watch that game. You want to sit there and stick a dagger into the people that did this in the college football thing? Stick a dagger in the network who's not going to make as much money. Now, I'd hate to see them boycott. I think that will probably make it even worse because these are invites only. And so I would hate that would damage Florida State's invite. But I don't think I would give them everything that they wanted. And I find that this decision was a disgrace. to college football. I think it's a disgrace to what you teach these kids, what these coaches teach is you fight through adversity. And no one has had more adversity than Florida State this year, and they deserve to be in this thing. And in the words of Bobby Bowden, the Dadgum committee got it wrong. Go Noles.